Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep week 43 going with today's Tolkien Tuesday. Now, we're back in the revised and expanded letters this series. This time, though, we're focusing on the letters that he wrote, the new letters, that is, around the time of The Lord of the Rings. Now, last time we wrapped up with letter number 140C, written in September 1953, with a lot of his commentary on the drawings for The Lord of the Rings. We're going to pick up a couple of months later on November 19th, 1953, with letter 141B to Rainer Unwin. Tolkien begins by acknowledging that he has unfortunately struggled with ill health all this term, and has only recently recovered enough to give his attention to all the things that need to be done. Now, a quick look at letter 141A, which we skipped because it doesn't directly deal with The Lord of the Rings, confirms this. There, he writes to P.H. Newby at the BBC on October 15th, saying that he is laid up at the moment, afflicted simultaneously with laryngitis, lumbago, and worst, sciatica. He ends up not able to record a talk for the BBC, and he postpones appointments for the next couple of weeks. He begins to recover, enough that he actually attends the BBC for a rehearsal of Sir Gawain on October 27th, but then on November 1st, he's caught out in a downpour, he says, setting back his recovery from illness. On November 6th, he writes to P.H. Newby again, "The germ renewed its assault on my throat at the end of last week, and my attempt to disregard it and carry on was ill-advised." Now, that last quote isn't in the letters volume. I actually found it in Skull and Hammond's chronology as I dug a little bit deeper. So yeah, at this point, Tolkien's been dealing with sickness for some time now as he writes this letter. The rest of the letter is about potential reviewers for The Lord of the Rings. He writes that, "I had seen C.S. Lewis, and he would be very glad to do anything to help in the matter of preliminary opinions. I think if you wrote to him, he might even suggest some other useful names. I myself can think of a few people who might be held to have some fame in the world, and were favorably disposed to The Hobbit. Some, indeed, even to The Lord of the Rings, but I do not know any of them well enough to be quite sure of their attitude toward such a request as the one you are thinking of, namely to read the first volume and give a quotable opinion of it." Now, moving on to letter 141C, this is also to Rainer Unwin. It's clear that the professor hasn't really caught a break when it comes to his health. Now, this letter is written 11 days later on November 30th, and he says, "I'm sorry that I've cracked at the critical moment, but this year has been too much for me. I recovered, only to fall victim to what they call gastric flu, brief but exhausting. And I've had, as Farmer Giles would say, a mort of other worrits." Glad to see you can keep a bit of a sense of humor about him at a time like that. Fast forward a few months, and he's a little healthier, and we're going to look at a short letter, 143A, that he writes to Allen and Unwin on March 16th, 1954. There, Tolkien tells his publisher that he's sent off the proof of the general map, together with a drawing for the small map, part of the Shire, also done by my son, C.J.R. Tolkien. And of that second map, Tolkien adds that it is intentionally drawn on a scale exactly twice that of the actual space available in the book. It is drawn and lettered with considerable clarity and is economical in entries, so I hope it will be legible when reduced if that must be done. It's always struck me as sufficiently clear, so kudos again to Christopher for his work on the maps. A week later, Tolkien sent them 2 notions for jackets for the first 2 volumes. This was in letter 143B, before sending some proofs that included some of the Elvish script with letter 143C the following day, which was March 24th. But then, returning to a theme that we saw repeatedly throughout the letters that we looked at in the first series, Tolkien reiterates the point that The Lord of the Rings is one book in letter 143D. He's writing to Rainer Unwin in response to a letter where Rainer had said they liked the theme of his design for Fellowship and suggested they use that same device on all 3 volumes. Tolkien says that, "I think the same device for each volume is, quite apart from expense, desirable. The whole thing is one book, really, and it would be a mistake to overemphasize the mechanically necessary divisions." I wholeheartedly agree. Now, a couple of weeks later, April 15th, he writes letter 143E to Allen and Unwin. He's going back to the proofs that he'd returned on March 24th, about 3 weeks earlier. He's cleared the proofs, but then he acknowledges, "I have now discovered 2 or 3 errors in the runic decoration of the title page, but I am afraid they must just remain, and I must bear the brunt of any later explanations or apologies to decipherers." Then, in a nod to the more pedantic of his readers, I'm sure none of us know anybody like that, he adds, If the runes on the Hobbit jacket are any criterion, there will be not a few. No, sir. You've got lots of folks out here happy to point out the very slightest of inconsistencies. I'm not one of them, but only because I wouldn't notice any issues with the runes. For now, though, folks, this wraps up this week's Tolkien Tuesday. But be sure to join me again next week for more Letters from Tolkien. In the meantime, please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can join the Content Council and be a part of deciding what I talk about each series. You also can support the show, get an ad-free feed, bonus episode, all that kind of stuff. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe, follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.